Hello, everybody. Welcome into a new episode of the End of the Week in International Relations and National Defense Policy News Review and Commentary Podcast. It's I, your good friend Morgan Houston, aka Whiskey Mo, the internet's least famous academic. I am a scholar of irregular warfare, air power, national defense policy. It's stagnant this week. I'm reading a lot of things about those things, so it's not growing, but it will. It will continue to grow. Hey, everybody. I hope that you have had a wonderful week. We are going to talk about some of the stories that I have been following this week. Very excited. One is, the first story we're going to cover is coming from a three-part series about defense acquisitions and the U.S. Air Force and the new training aircraft. Very interesting. There's one good takeaway from it, but the rest of it I find to be somewhat problematic. The second story is an interesting story about AI on the battlefield when it comes to an air assault brigade and its implementation of AI within a training rotation at the Joint Readiness Training Center in Louisiana. And the third story is about a retiring general and what that means for our national defense and our national security. So everyone, I hope that you've had a wonderful week. And as you were listening in, let's get to the first story. And this is about the Air Force T-7 program, which is the new training platform that the Air Force has contracted with Boeing with. And this story comes from Breaking Defense, which it is a three-part series that came out this week. I happened to catch it at the very beginning of the week, and let me tell you what, it was a ride. I will, as always, put links to the story below. But this story is about Boeing, its inability to contribute intellectual property data that is needed for sustainment and maintenance, about cost overruns, and about the weird way that the Air Force is incentivizing Boeing to do things that some insiders believe that they should already be doing. So how this worked is back in 2018, the contract was signed with Boeing after a request for a proposal for their new trainer. Currently, the Air Force uses an aircraft called the T-38, which has been a phenomenal training aircraft for the Air Force throughout the decades, but it's time to upgrade the systems, and Boeing won the proposal to build this new training aircraft. And based off of some of the reporting, it seems like they kind of undercut themselves. They bid so low that now, as they are building the program, they are losing billions of dollars as they're currently trying to build this platform. And some of the things, apparently these are things that have happened before. Some of the things, like there's this program called active management, which gives financial incentives for the contractor, the prime contractor, to move things along and hit certain points. The problem is that the Air Force itself is now giving this active management these financial incentives as a way to, what one insider said was to incentivize things that Boeing should already be doing. There are concerns about maintenance data that needs to be handed over from Boeing and its contractors to the Air Force, because the Air Force really wants to have an organic maintenance ability with this program. What that means is that Air Force maintainers, those who have enlisted, have gone through the technical training schools to maintain these platforms, and then they can utilize contractors if possible. And the reason that organic maintenance is really important is it doesn't rely on contractors in case of a need to go forward and fight and maintain in wartime, which is not as a necessary thing in with a training aircraft, but it's still a good process to have. Plus, it is a little bit cheaper than to hire out contractors. But this data, it seems that Boeing did not receive the critical systems information and items from its contractors, where it contracts other parts to put into the final product. And the Air Force is having to find ways to get this data from other contractors. In one case, what has happened is now that the Air Force has separated the engines aspect from Boeing and now going directly to the initial subcontractor, which is GE. And they now, granted, this engine that is being used has been used in a ton of other platforms. So luckily, they can make this work. It's not going to be a super big thing, and they're getting the training down. But this is just one of many side steps that the Air Force is going to have to do, and this is costing the taxpayers billions of dollars. One source said that the Air Force is not being a good steward of taxpayer money, which is troublesome. The Defense Department already has never passed an audit when it comes to financials. The only part of the Defense Department that has is the USMC. And that's mostly because they are super thrift-bear. The Marine Corps doesn't spend money very well, not as in they don't spend it properly. They do, but they spend the bare minimum. So it's pretty easy for the Marine Corps compared to the rest of the branches. But this is a continuing problem. The only good thing that comes out of this is it seems that they are planning to have aircraft fly in 2027, which will be a 9-year from contract signing to develop to the entering of service of this aircraft, this airframe, which is smaller and shorter than any other time frame. The average time frame for new weapons systems to be implemented throughout the Defense Department is 16 years. So in 9 years, that's a fairly significant number. However, even that rolling out is a little bit odd. The full aircraft will not be completely meet the Air Force airworthiness standards. So what this means is that they're going to have to place pretty restrictive limitations on how this aircraft can fly. Luckily, when they're doing the new rollout, it's going to be for the trainers who are going to learn how to fly it, so they can train the new Air Force pilots. So the idea is that as they continue to operate this new system, they're going to learn, and then Boeing and the Air Force will continue to kind of trickle out new upgrades to make sure that the platform is fully implemented in a proper way. The one of the other concerns from another insider was that what makes this kind of inherently problematic is that this is an aircraft that's being used to train pilots. So there's not a lot of significant instinct and internal functioning for these pilots. I know when I was in Air Force training, I wasn't a pilot, I was a TAC-P, but crawl, walk, run is a thing, and things happen very fast as we get more and more advanced. And so the pilots are going to need to have a little bit of intuition. So hopefully the way that this rolls out won't cause significant safety issues, but that is something that is highlighted in these set of 3 articles, is that there are some safety concerns with the rollout and with the data. And one of the things that this article did well, that I think it pointed out also the contractors' concerns with some of this stuff. Because essentially, when you're handing over this maintenance data and this sustainment data, you're handing over your intellectual property rights to the Air Force. But I think this is really problematic when we talk about these things, because I understand your desire to protect your IP, but the thing is that the Air Force and the DoD in general is not a competitor. They're not building their own aircraft, they're maintaining it. And I understand that companies are wanting to have profits, but there seemed to have been a point back in the past when there was a little bit of a level of patriotism when it came to the companies that were supplying our military. And that seems to have been lost, and now it's nickel and diming. There's a problem with the way that the defense industrial base has shrunk. Now, that one of the good things about the Trump administration is that they are attempting to expand it and to find new ways to implement new policies and increase the defense industrial base. I don't know if it's going to work, but it does seem to be something that they're implementing. So this is something that I've recently kind of started to learn and really engage about things in the defense industrial base. I've had some really strong opinions about acquisitions, and unfortunately, the things that I have learned within the last 2 to 3 years has really kind of reinforced my opinions about the defense industrial base, and with the military industrial complex and the way that our acquisitions program works, it needs a drastic overhaul. And this is just one more nail in the coffin for that. And I hope that Congress will see this and really start to query some of the things. We've seen a lot of contract things happen with the F-35, the B-21, the F-47. Like, there are things that are really shady in the way that our acquisitions things work, and I really would love to see Congress really nail down on it. The problem is that these companies have significant amount of lobbyists, and they are very friendly with a lot of our elected officials, and it's very it's going to be very hard to make meaningful and appropriate changes to the defense acquisition system. But I'm going to leave links to the stories. They are very quick reads. It's 3 stories. They're probably about 10 to 15-minute reads each. So if you have a little bit of a time this weekend, go ahead and read them. They're very wonderful, very well written, and there was a lot of investigative journalism here, and I think it was done very well. The second story, I believe, also comes from Breaking Defense, but it is a story about AI and its implementation at a brigade level. For those of you who don't know, there are levels within the Army, and going from smallest to biggest, you start with your fire team, about 4 people, then your squad, which is a couple of fire teams, and then a platoon, a couple of squads, company, couple of platoons, battalion, couple of companies, and then the battalion has the brigade, which is the higher level. It's really one of the main fighting forces of the U.S. Army. When I was in the Air Force, my unit supported the 173rd Airborne Brigade. It was about, all told, about 5,000 people in the brigade, about 3,000 active, combat arms guys. When we jumped into Iraq, there was about 3,000 total jumpers. But yeah, so one of the brigades from the 101st Airborne Division, which is not airborne despite the name, it's just a historical thing that sticks with it. It is an air assault brigade, which means essentially that it operates on helicopters moving fast forward using helicopter tactics to move forward. And this current brigade had been singled out to try and utilize AI within their staff. So each level of commander has staff officers from battalion on up, and those are operations, intelligence, personnel, all of those. There's the 1 through 9, essentially, the S1, G1, those kinds of things. If you want to know more about them, get in the comments, let me know. I will do a video about the Army staffing system and the joint staff system, those kinds of things. But what had happened is that each level and each shop essentially had been given its own large language model so that they could train it specifically to work for them. And they had found that the large language models that they were using really struggled with 3-dimensional space. And I think that's just something we as humans, I think sometimes we have an innate ability to operate within a 3-dimensional space, but to really comprehend it is very difficult. It's one of the most difficult things with joint terminal attack control stuff, calling in close air support, getting people to understand limited spaces and flight levels and how to integrate those kinds of things. So I'm not surprised that large language models are really struggling with the 3-dimensional space. They did say that there are some ways that AI shortened the chain of getting orders out, especially when it comes to operations orders, fragmentary orders, those kinds of things. It would shrink up to 72 hours faster to get orders down once they had officially gotten everything done. But it took a little bit of trial and error to get this work. And I find this really fascinating. I think this is a good way to use large language models, is that they're not using them to replace anybody, but what they are trying to do with this is trying to create efficiencies within the system, because no military system, no person operates solo on its own. There's a whole structure that needs to be followed. And I think that there are some really good opportunities for large language models. I know a lot of people may think that I'm anti-AI. I am very not anti-AI. I would say I'm very critical, and I'm very, very leery of the desire for some people to want to just automatically hand over all of their agency to these large language models, because this is not artificial intelligence, right? This is not a sentient thing that can make decisions on its own. What it's doing, these large language models, what it's doing is it's referring to things that it has learned in the past and then trying to regurgitate that in maybe a somewhat unique and exquisite way. And I think there are very interesting ways that this could be happening. And I think that this is the way that the military can really utilize it. And I will put the link to this article. It's a quick read, very good read. I find it very interesting that there's a lot of really good practical application of these things. And it seems that, unlike my time, there seems to be a lot quicker turnaround to adopting new technologies in the current state of the DoD. And I think that's a great thing. But I think that one of the things that we always need to be cognizant of is to not be so wedded to the idea that we need new technology, when in fact the things that have continued to be proven that wins wars are solid infantry tactics, possession of ground, and forcing the enemy to surrender. Like, despite what is happening in Ukraine right now, we're not seeing any kind of real into the things because it's a stalemate. We essentially haven't seen much movement, even though Ukraine has been making much more progress on retaking some of its land. But those are the things that win wars, is essentially infantry owning land. So let's keep an eye on it. I think this is going to be really interesting in the future to see how these large language models are implemented into the systems. The last story for this week is one that's a little disheartening for me. I'm not personally connected, but except for through some emotional ties to this story. The big story is, and I'll find another story. I've seen it a couple of places. I'll make sure I include a link in the thing below. General Christopher Donahue, who is, as of right now, the current commander of U.S. European Command and is also dual-hatted as the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe for NATO forces, has submitted his documentation for retirement. And from what has been reported, this comes on the heels of some clashes between he and the current Secretary of Defense. This was a concern we had in the very first Trump administration once people like Jim Mattis started to retire. There was always a lot of concern over what what any administration can do, because having a commander-in-chief does allow for a lot of control over the military. And we've seen it recently, despite the fact that, technically speaking, legally, only Congress can declare war on another country. We're seeing ever since since Bush Jr. that presidents have utilized the way that they can utilize troops for a short period of time without congressional authorization. And we are much more likely to see presidents utilize forces in a way that ends up being questionable in its legality. And this isn't just for the current administration. There's questions about the Obama administration, the Biden administration, and the Bush administration. But one of the things that is starting to happen within the last decade or so is we are starting to see the bold and outright vocal and good leaders leave because they're not seeming to have good relations with the civilians that have been appointed above them. And this is not a critique on the civilian control of the military. I think that is essential to maintaining a diplomatic and democratic view of the military, because it's, you can't have people just be answerable to the military, because that's how corruption and power starts. But that's a whole different thing. But what makes this one so disheartening is the fact that General Donahue is just an exemplar of Army service. General Donahue is an Army officer. He's a 4-star general. In his illustrious career, he has served within Army Special Mission Units, including being the commander of the famous Army Special Mission Unit. He has served as the commander of one of the most storied divisions of all time, the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne Division, and then went on to serve as the commander of the higher headquarters of that in the 18th Airborne Corps, and eventually becoming the head of U.S. European Command, which is one of the combatant commands, one of the most senior roles, because the way that the military command structure works, set out in the 1986 Goldwater-Nichols Act, is that the president is the commander of chief, and then he submits his orders to the Secretary of Defense, which then those orders go out to the combatant commanders. And there's, I believe, 12 of them. I don't have it off the top of my head. But the EUCOM commander has always been a really important role, because it has always been dual-hatted since the creation of NATO as the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, the SOCUR, which is a legacy title that comes from Eisenhower from his time as a commander in World War II. and he is the senior commander, military commander in NATO, and he represents the U.S. and NATO in those military environments. And General Donahue is not a sycophant. He's not someone who is just going to be a yes man. By all accounts, he is just a very integrity-focused, people-first commander. I've yet to find any negative information about him. Now, granted, I'm not looking very hard, but usually that stuff is not hard to pop up. And you don't usually get to the UCOM commander without, having pretty good performance reports. And I see problems in the way that we just constantly want to remove opposing voices within our defense and our national security communities, because having diverse and opposing voices is really important, because we need to have the understanding of how we don't want yes men, because we want people to challenge us to make sure that we are understanding how there are other options, because what we think is best, because of our blindness and our implicit biases, can end up being super negative. We want to make sure that we look at all of the options. And I'm currently reading a paper from the Council on Foreign Relations by someone who I had met previously. She is the current president of my first alma mater, which is Metro State University of Denver, Janine Davidson, about the civil military divide and those kinds of things. And I think it's really important to have conflicting and counter arguments to your decision-making matrices, because that's how we make the best decision possible. No one can know everything. And especially when we talk about things like civilian control of the military, in most cases, most of the people who are in that civilian side of the chain of command don't have military experience. Now, in this case, the Secretary of Defense does, but it's very limited and it's very low level. As a major, the first level of a field grade officer, that doesn't really give you that high level of experience on the strategic and national level. I barely had a little bit, even as a younger enlisted guy. It was the nature of the job that I had. You had to have at least some idea of how the strategic level worked. And the only reason I have it now is because I've gone and sought out. I've read the doctrine. I took classes. I'm nearly complete. I'm a capstone away from a master's in this area. And these are things that you learn as you read, even going back to things like Sun Tzu and Clausewitz. Like, having consenting voices is really important. Dissenting of voices. You don't always want to have consenting, just purely consenting voices. So this is something I'm really interested to see who's going to be nominated as the next UCOM commander. It's a really important role right now with the current war in Ukraine. I think some of the more important roles in DoD right now are your UCOM, your now PACOM. It's no longer Indo-PACOM. Of course, your SOCOM commander and CENTCOM are usually your big four. But watching, I wish General Donahue the best, sir. I know that I remember seeing that video and that picture of you as the last American soldier to step foot off of Afghani soil. And it was really complex feelings that it brought on me. That image was still seared in my brain. And because of that, that's how I know so much about your career, because I wanted to know who you were. And I have a lot of respect for you, sir. And I hope that your next steps are gratifying. I hope you find something wonderful to do. I'm sure that there's quite a few universities who would love to have your voice as a member of their faculty. So I wish you all the best, sir. And I hope that you can move on, and you've had a very successful and honorable career. And I tip my hat to you. I salute you. I hope you have a wonderful post-Army career. And that's going to be it for this week. I thank you so much, as always, for listening. If you found some value in this, as always, please gently caress that like button. It really does help. Anytime that I have a video that gets more views, it always because there's more likes on it. Getting that click, that thumbs up, is really helpful. Also, if you give me a subscribe, click that subscribe button, or on Spotify, the follow button. Also on Spotify, if you would mind giving me a 5-star review or a 1-star review, just give me a review. Have people engage with it. I really would love to hear what you have to think. As always, if you have stories for me, or if you want to comment on the stories that we've talked about, go ahead and get in the comments. I really would love to hear what you have to say. Let's make this a discussion. Or if you have ideas for other videos, I'm very excited for all of this. So thank you so much as always. If you want to know when new videos come out, go ahead and hit the notification bell. That'll let you know when new videos drop, both of this podcast and the regular videos that I produce. As always, I hope that you gain some value out of this, and I hope that you guys have a great rest of your time over the next week, and I'll see you again at the end of the week.